It's 10 in the morning. The Venture Brothers, a show that either gets an excited response or usually a I've never seen it or I stopped after season 2. But what started as a comic book turned Johnny Quest parody would go on to become one of the most underrated and extremely lore-heavy shows ever created.
I'm you from the future. We have to finish our time machine before the Angels of Destruction find the portal.
And that's impressive considering the show has only run for 7 seasons over the course of 15 years. It's a long time. Sadly, Venture Brothers was unceremoniously cancelled after the last season in 2018, but a feature-length episode titled Radiant is the Blood of the Baboon Heart is coming on July 21st, which is potentially serving as the final curtain for the second family of science. It's a show that brilliantly created a whole world filled with history, conspiracy, bureaucracy, complicated relationships, and most of all, broken people. And we haven't seen anyone do a video mapping out the history of the Venture universe, so I'm gonna do it. As a way to say goodbye to this beautiful show about idiots and to help me get through all of this, I'm going to be sampling Doctails as we step through the show's history.
You know what? It's time you learned a Doctail. The ruddy bottom.
Oh, and if you're not caught all the way up on the show, this video is going to be littered with spoilers all over the place. So if you don't want a bunch of things spoiled for you, you should probably stop watching now. Or don't, I'm not your dad.
It's unbelievable. Who comes to the last movie in a trilogy without seeing the first 2?
We have a specific set of criteria for what makes it into the timeline and what doesn't. If we just went through and recounted everything that happened in every episode, nobody would want to watch that. Or maybe you do, maybe a few people do. We're also not going to be focusing on the emotional or mental arcs of characters as much as I'd like to. But again, if I wanted to go into a deep dive psychology of Venture Brothers characters, this video would still be being edited. Steak Bentley has a fantastic video on their channel that tackles the psychology of Venture characters that I highly recommend, but please watch it after this one. For our timeline, we're going to focus on important events at the time they happen in the world of the Ventureverse. Our main sources for this video is the show itself, creator commentary found on the special features of the Blu-rays, my overall obsession with the show, and the incredible in-depth book Go Team Venture, The Art and Making of the Ventureverse, which was written by my close and personal friend, Ken Plume.
And then he said I was his friend. I don't know. I'll shut him down. Don't worry. I'm on it.
I should also note up top that the creators of this show have said that the episodes we see are random days of the characters' lives and there's always something happening off screen that we aren't privy to.
We're always trying to convince you that the best stuff ever
Happens off camera.
happens between episodes. That they in fact have way more than 13 adventures every season.
And the boys
These are just the ones we choose to show.
So the way we've determined which events make it into the timeline depends on how they affect the overall arc of the show from seasons 1 to 7. And I'll also be touching on some real historical references that are included in the show.
Go to hell, Ron. Elron.
Basically, if you're a fan of Triana, Orpheus, Shore Leave, Brick Frog, Intangible Fancy, Watch, Ward, The Pirate Captain, Sky Pilot, Trucules, Catclops, Wariana, we most likely won't be focusing on them. Be mean to me about it in the comments. This means we won't be highlighting every episode either. We're locked in on the events that affect the arc of the Venture family, the Monarch crew, the Guild, the OSI, and the collateral damage they cause along the way. And we'll also be including events that have years and dates that are mentioned over the course of the show. Basically, if it's a bottle episode, it's probably not going to get mentioned. I'm looking at you, Love Bites.
Then I'll see you in heck.
Now, to start properly mapping out the history of the Ventureverse, we're going all the way back to the Gilded Age, more or less. It's a pun. The first character and Venture on the board is Colonel Lloyd Venture, who we see for the first time in Season 3, Episode 11, titled Orb. Lloyd Venture, the great-grandfather of Dr. Venture, was a super scientist as well, and one of the founders of the original form of the Guild. He was also a milliner. They make ladies' hats. According to the tour at Ventec Tower, Colonel Venture was integral to the first moon landing, which in the Venture universe happened in 1902, and is the first pinpoint on our timeline. 5 years later, the Great Venture Millinery Fire of 1907 happened after a dumpster full of old felt straps in the attic was struck by a Zeppelin. This is a reference to the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911 in Greenwich, New York. The Venture workers were unable to escape the fire because Colonel Venture had locked the doors to the factory, which was actually common practice in the 1900s to stop workers from stealing, and this is a reminder to take your vacation. Your job is not your life and your boss is not your friend. We see Lloyd Venture for the first time with the original Guild, a cabal of the most brilliant minds who founded the organization to protect and serve humanity's best, as well as to protect and keep the mysterious artifact known as the Orb from those who might want to use it for evil. It's hard to determine the exact year when the original Guild was founded and in turn was attacked by Nikola Tesla and the Avon ladies because of who the original Guild members were. The non-fictional members included author Mark Twain, occultist Aleister Crowley, playwright Oscar Wilde, and famous strongman turned chocolatier Eugen Sandow, who was the first Venture bodyguard. Oscar Wilde passed in 1900 and Twain died in 1910, so we can't put a firm date here year, but we're just gonna say 1908 with an asterisk. Probably right after Grover Cleveland invented his time machine, or when the Second American Revolution started.
The Invisible One.
Before Colonel Venture could use the orb in an attempt to combat the Guild's enemies, it was destroyed by Sandow and later refurbished in secret, which Sandow makes a record of on a series of wax cylinders. And this is when the Gilded Age era starts to get fuzzy. We know that Phantomus, the grandfather of Phantom Limb, took control of the Guild in 1910 and rebranded it as the Guild of Calamitous Intent, directing its eye towards villainy. I'm going to just call them the Guild now to save everyone a whole bunch of time.
Red Moco Cooler.
To start off, we have a delicious red Moco cooler. It's actually not terrible. We're now entering a fun little zone I'm calling the Age of Obscurity. A lot of stuff happens between the Guild power shift. Colonel Venture's son, the eventual father of Jonas Venture Sr., is born, and he also grows up to become a super scientist.
We don't actually know anything about Jonas's father.
And then things stay quiet for a while, aside from Crimodial being born in 1952, which we learned from his headstone. And in 1958, the Guild Non-Assail Pact was signed in regards to Guild deserters not being punished for abandoning their service.
Service Abandonment Guild Non-Assail Pact of 1958, paragraph 20, line 17, regarding employers' rights to a deserter.
Yeah, here's all the paperwork.
And somewhere along the road, Jonas Venture Sr. officiated the first Treaty of Tolerance Summit between the Guild and the OSI.
Well, my father officiated the first summit. Can't let the old man show me up.
And that's when the Age of Obscurity ends, and it's more of a moment than an age, kind of like Ultron. But we're about to get off the runway and go headfirst into what is going to be the most chaotic years in the Venture timeline, and that is the Golden Age of Super Science. It is a hot mummy.
My only claim. That one.
No, this one's gonna me up.
That one is.
Okay. The Golden Age of Super Science starts with the aforementioned Phantomas recruiting two men who may or may not be Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper. The villains Red Mantle and Dragoon claimed that they were the first two recruits of Phantomos' rock and roll orchestra.
This band made up of kidnapped musicians from this old band and his ridiculous sousaphone.
Meaning that the day the music died was potentially a smokescreen to allow the two square-headed musicians to transition to a life of supervillainy. We don't see Richie Valens in the flashback, so we're just going to assume that he never got on that plane and La Bamba fever kept sweeping the nation after 1959. The Phantomos section of the timeline ends right after that. There's no word on how he died, if he was pushed out of the Guild for being terrible at sousaphone. But thanks to the music-obsessed weirdo, a new age of Guild had begun. And now it's time to introduce the worst father of the Ventureverse and probably the worst person overall, Jonas Venture Sr.
Go, Team Venture!
We don't know exactly what year Jonas was born, but it was probably sometime between the 1930s and 1940. But in 1960, Rusty Venture was born to Jonas and an unknown mother, who we've never seen. Technically, two Venture sons were born that day, but we'll cross that umbilical when we get to it. At some point, Jonas, along with the help of Ben, perfected the genetic engineering process that would lead to successful and highly illegal cloning technology, which was first used to clone Rusty, who did die at one point of his childhood.
You mean the clone thing?
Goodbye, Rusty Venture.
Rusty? What, you thought it was... Okay. Wow.
Now this is the time in the video where I suggest you make yourself a nice sandwich or a cocktail because things are about to get convoluted. And fun and convoluted. In 1962, Jonas unveiled the first commercial helper bot to the buying public at Ventec Tower, which was formerly the Venture Millinery and Automata Company. A year later, Don Fitzcarraldo, aka the father of the Monarch, aka the Blue Morpho, and his bodyguard Kano, make their first appearance in the timeline by rescuing the original Team Venture from Scaramantula, who is also making his first appearance in the timeline. Taking the sweatshirt off, this is hot. Getting hot. This flashback is revealed to be a comic book, but as we learn through Doc Venture and commentary from Jackson Public and Doc Hammer, events that are depicted in comic form and on the Rusty Venture cartoon are echoes of real events, which were usually much darker than they were depicted.
This is a guy that was like a childhood hero. Maybe lived a lot of this, maybe didn't. and in his mind, he's not sure if he rode a giant scorpion or it was just on the show.
Right, yeah, he's confused. Probably, yeah, I'm sure his real life was worse than what they put on TV.
In this flashback, the original Team Venture consists of Jonas, Colonel Horace Gentleman, and the Action Man. That's also our first Bowie reference of the timeline. Throw it on the board. Bowie. We don't have an idea of what year Jonas founded his team of super lunatics or when Otto Aquarius joined, but it might be sometime after Jonas had completed construction on the new Venture compound, which is directly inspired by the General Motors Futurama exhibit from the 1964 World's Fair. Jonas and the original Team Venture also met with President JFK during this period, as well as Sammy Davis Jr. We round out 1963 with the death of Santa Claus, which we learned about from Dr. Orpheus.
There's no such thing as Santa Claus.
Not since he was killed by a jet in 1963, no.
Sometime within the next 3 years, Jonas makes an appearance on the Dick Cavett Show. He abandons the Eden bio facility at the Venture compound.
When was the last time you opened this? Well, the project was abandoned 40 years ago.
Helps Roy Brisby break ground at Brisbyland, and designs a few of the theme park's rides and attractions.
You said you wanted to help Daddy, son.
Jonas, Rusty, and Team Venture eventually make their way to Colorado Springs, where we see the Venture compound still under construction, and we're introduced to Turnbuckle. Turnbuckle is a minor villain who attempted to kidnap Rusty in broad daylight, but he brought pugilism to a gunfight and was brutally beaten and then shot in the head by the Action Man because he's f***ing crazy.
Kiss my ass!
This event led the guild to introducing the equally matched aggression system, the EMA. The EMA is the principle that arch enemies, or arches as they're called in the show, should be paired with a hero that has a similar amount of power and resources. Basically keeping the scales balanced, otherwise you end up with a Dr. Dugong situation.
You abandoned my hatred!
I have cuddled that.
Look into my eyes!
In 1966, the previously unveiled helper bots finally hit store shelves. It went well for a minute, but public opinion quickly turned against the line of robot servants. A choking hazard incident leads to panic and eventually a nationwide event known as the Great Recalling, where people incinerated their helper bots in public burnings as protest. Very similar to people burning Beatles records in 1966 after John Lennon said they were more popular than Jesus.
You know, I just said what I said and it was wrong or was taken wrong, and now it's all this.
All but 2 helper bots were destroyed. The original Helper, who is still with the Venture to this day, and Helper Model 2, who lives with Ben on the Venture compound in secret. Slightly.
And we just got Netflix, so I have Skins, that old show where British kids have sex and take drugs.
During this year, Jonas founded the Boys Brigade, a team of boy adventurers that consisted of a young General Man-Hours in his first appearance, as well as a young Professor Richard Dickey Impossible, and a young disgruntled Hamilton G. Phantomus, as well as a Boy Scout who is named and modeled after the scientist and author of The God Problem, Howard Bloom, who Jackson cites as a friend, neighbor, and inspiration behind some elements of Venture lore. We don't know much about why the Boys Brigade was founded or about their adventures aside from their eventual kidnapping.
Force Majeure had the Boys Brigade here for ransom in '68.
Ah, yes. You know, that probably makes us the first boys in space.
In 1967, the Guild signed the Charter of Casual Contact, which is never fully explained, but it is referenced in Tag Sale Year It.
By virtue of their presence at an event
I am in a pair of the 1967 Charter of Casual Contact.
Is very likely a rule that enforces neutral ground at events where both protagonists and their arches congregate, like a yard sale or a water park.
Hey! Can we get a ride?
Dude, tell me you didn't walk out before the credits were over.
That same year, Rusty visits the moon at age 7, making him the first American boy to go into space and successfully return home, unlike a Russian child named Dmitri, who wasn't as lucky.
Poor little Dmitri.
To wrap out 1967, Jonas continues being a total piece of shit and convinces Don to cheat on his wife with actresses Jill St. John and Stella Stevens, all while secretly filming the affair to use as blackmail on his friend. In 1968, Jonas removes Rusty's kidney after a prank by the Action Man goes horribly, horribly wrong. We'll come back to this later. And that eventual kidnapping of the Boys Brigade finally happens by the hand of guild leader Force Majeure, who held the boys ransom aboard Meteor Majeure, his floating space lair, which is inspired by Asteroid M from the X-Men comics. In September of 1968, Malcolm Fitzcarraldo was born to Don and his wife, Mrs. Fitzcarraldo. This happens after Jonas offers to help the couple who had been struggling to conceive a child. Jonas makes a comment about,
"You should have the little woman swing by my compound for a thorough examination."
You think you can help her?
Oh, I know I can. My science is quite potent.
But most likely he just had sex with Don's wife, and we know he lorded the sex tape over Don's head to keep him in line. If you somehow made it this far in the video without knowing that Doc and the Monarch are at least half brothers, well, now you do.
Are you kidding me?
In October that same year, Jonas and Team Venture traveled to Greece to attend the wedding of former First Lady Jackie Kennedy and her new husband, shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis. That wedding is interrupted by L. Ron Hubbard, who was distracting Team Venture from protecting the returning Apollo 7 craft, which contained American astronaut Wally Schirra, who Colonel Gentleman was known to be intimate with.
Wally's on that mission!
Till the day he tried to ambush me in the middle of a threesome with Gore Vidal and Wally Schirra.
Fun little history note, all of these things actually happened in October of 1968. Jackie O's wedding was held on the island of Scorpios on October 20th, 1968. 2 days later, Apollo 7, the first manned Apollo mission, splashes down near Bermuda. During all of this, Hubbard and his Sea Org had settled near the Greek island of Corfu from 1968 to 1969, after he and his crew of Scientologists were kicked out of both Australia and England and were still hiding from the French and American governments for tax fraud. While all this is happening, Rusty is accidentally kidnapped by local thieves and held for ransom. When Jonas never responds to their demands, the kidnappers cheer up a hysterical Rusty by inventing the Festival of Games called
Panicopita!
The festival lasts for 3 days and begins on either the 22nd or 23rd of October. All of this is recounted in the same comic that features the Blue Morpho's first appearance.
He shows up again in issue 36 when they team up to fight L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah, super.
Highlighting that Team Venture comics and the shows are somewhat faithful retellings of real events that happened in the universe. Again, somewhat. We move into 1969, where Jonas and the team are somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle, attempting to save Major Tom from fatally crashing during the test of the TVC-15. And that's another Bowie reference.
Ashes to ashes.
At this time, we see Kano aboard the X-2. He's no longer working for the Blue Morpho. The Jonas Venture comic claims that Kano joined Venture after the Blue Morpho became possessed by an alien virus that made him evil. But in reality, Jonas leveraged the sex tape against Blue Morpho into giving up Kano as his right-hand man.
You're a child within the year.
Sure, but you took Kano as payment for your services. And you hung that tape over my head for years to get me to do your dirty work.
During this time, the Guild signed an addendum to Article 47 of the Unusual Torture Act in their rulebook, which is better known as Rusty's Law.
The addendum to the Unusual Torture Act is also called Rusty's Law. They used to call my dad Rusty.
How do you think your father knew everything about it?
The rule states that in the event of a protagonist's child becomes injured during a hostage situation with a guild member, the guild member must allow said protagonist and their child to leave their custody and receive medical treatment, and then are required to voluntarily return to their captors once said injury has been treated.
We meet back here in 2 days. I keep the big one as collateral.
We see all of this play out in Are You There, God? It's Me, Dean.
Dean, have you been shooting dope into your scrotum? You can tell me. I'm him!
The decade wraps up with a bang as we're introduced to the Fraternity of Torment, a very short-lived organization started by Scaramantula and includes the villains Manotar, Brainulo, and Jonas Venture in a terrible and offensive disguise.
Go, Team Venture!
This is a reference to the James Bond film You Only Live Twice, where Sean Connery wears a terribly offensive disguise. Nobody piped up and said this was a bad idea. The original Team Venture swoops in to rescue a kidnapped Rusty, and this is where we first meet Otto Aquarius, Swifty the Boxer, Ook Ook the Caveman, and Humongoloid. And it's the first appearance of a Venture hoverbike, which is being ridden by the Action Man. After the self-destruct switch on the island turns out to be a dud, Jonas took Spider Skull Island for himself and converted it into headquarters for Team Venture. It's hard to say when the next few events happen, but we know that Rusty meets Tara Quim during his childhood at a Jonas Venture key party.
Oh, you pretty thing.
According to Rusty at this time, his father made him kill a man with a house key when he was 10.
My father made me kill a man with a house key. I was 10.
And this is around the same time when Jonas basically kidnaps Hector Molina to be Rusty's adventure friend. 1971 comes roaring in with Gargantua 1, the monolithic space station that boasted being able to house 9,000 Venture industry employees. At this time, only 2,000 employees are on board, including one busy barber, according to the recruitment film that features a young Rusty playing with plastic cowboys. That'll also come back. In 1972, the villain known as the Sovereign, a down-on-his-luck shapeshifter, meets David Bowie and is possibly on the cover of Bowie's pinups from 1973, or is one of the creatures on the cover of Diamond Dogs from 1974. Sometime between 1971 and 1975, Professor Impossible invents the Goliath serum for use during the Vietnam War. A container of that serum would go on to hit Hank in the face. We know the Blue Morpho is still working for Jonas in 1976. He was sent to Singapore and miraculously disguised himself as tennis star Billie Jean King to seduce Dr. Z, who is making his first timeline appearance right here. There's a few Dr. Z flashbacks that might have happened before this, but this is where I'm putting him on the timeline. The Blue Morpho takes back the Jade Dragon, The Blue Morpho takes back the Jade Dragon that Dr. Z had stolen and leaves the good evil doctor with a lot of questions.
I don't know if he did a switcheroo or he just had a super duper costume, but I made tender yet purely accidental love Oh, they blow him awful.
That same year, during his 16th birthday, Rusty is horribly pranked by the original Team Venture and a shrink ray gun.
The action man shoots my groin with a shrink ray right as that jackass Colonel Gentleman pulls my shorts down.
A short 3 years later, while flying on their private plane, Blue Morpho, his wife, and a very young Malcolm sadly crash in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. Mrs. Fitzgeraldo dies in the crash. Malcolm was somehow unscathed but lost in the woods. According to himself, he was raised by monarch butterflies until they left him to fly south to Mexico. Malcolm then hopped a bus to New York and collected his enormous inheritance. The Blue Morpho's corpse was scooped up by Jonas and taken back to the Venture compound. The plane was said to have crashed just minutes after taking off from Newark Airport, and an unknown person claimed the reward from the guild for eliminating the Blue Morpho, who was a dangerous vigilante at the time.
In 1976, that bounty was claimed.
Their identity has yet to be revealed, but I have a guess who it might be.
I need you to seduce Dr. Z.
On September 30th of that same year, Jonas successfully transformed Morpho's mangled cadaver into a cyborg with a mostly wiped memory, a monotone voice, and dubbed him Venturian. That's f***ed up. Jonas soon lost interest in his horrific experiment and made Venturian Rusty's nanny, which then backfired when a crying Rusty activated Alex Murphy mode and he replayed a memory of Malcolm crying, which led to Venturian strangling Rusty, and then Kano ripping off Venturian's head on June 23rd of 1977. That's f***ed up. Jonas dumped Venturian's body in a dumpster outside of the Venture compound, where he's discovered by a drunken trio of Dr. Z and the villain Shrill Spectre and Harry Nilsson, who are based off musician Harry Nilsson and the record producer / convicted murderer Phil Spector. Dr. Z collects the remains of Venturian, reassembles him, turns his evil switch on, and dubbed him Vendetta. That's f***ed up. Vendetta would eventually become a member of the guild and later a member of the Council of 13, but his story stops here for just a little bit. Jonas continues his world tour of being awful and rounds out the 1970s by inviting the Rusty Venture fan club from a local orphanage to take a tour of the shiny new Fallout shelter on the Venture compound in 1978. All of this went south when Mother became corrupted. Mother was the nanny AI that Jonas invented to run the fully automated survival bunker and released a dangerous amount of hallucinogenic gas into said bunker during the tour. Jonas did what you would expect him to do and left a whole mess of orphans locked in an underground bunker with nothing but an old Venture educational film and Dr. Entman, who was formerly Homongoloid. Roy Brisby enters the timeline again in 1980, 1981 perhaps, when he wins his Companda Lili in a trivia contest against David Bowie. Count it.
But then Bowie always was a trendsetter.
The Venture Industries building was bought and converted to One Impossible Plaza in 1984, becoming the Baxter building of the Venture universe. The Baxter building is actually located on 42nd and Madison, and Ventec / Impossible Plaza is near Columbus Circle. I had to say that would have driven me nuts. And with that, we end the golden age of super science era of our timeline, and we slide into the college years, like Saved by the Bell.
I call it a hunchback.
Bottoms up.
I hate this.
You wrote it in.
I'm thankfully just getting bourbon. Oh, I'm getting the ketchup now. Ugh, not nearly as long as the previous era, but this chunk of time introduces a whole mess of characters and ties their connections in a Gordian knot of Reagan era nonsense. Also, the timing of things starts to get a little fudged around now, so stick with me. Going by the events of the show, Rusty is a student at State College from at least 1986 to 1987, where he met Pete White, who makes his first appearance on the timeline here, along with Baron Underbite, Mike Sorayama, and Rusty's underclassman roommate, Brock Sampson.
I think that's your roommate, Rust.
As well as Malcolm Fitzgeraldo, who accidentally blows up Underbite in an attempt to kill Rusty.
Malcolm, did you hear?
What?
TS Venture.
What? Tell me, is he dead?
No! He blew up Werner Underbite's face!
Back in New York City during what's referred to as the Guild's underground days, a crew made up of Red Death, Stab Girl, Vendetta, Mr. Fahrenheit, Laugh Riot, and Hatebit find their way aboard the Gargantua 1 space station to Arch Jonas Venture on April 9th of 1987. While aboard the space station, Vendetta threatens to expose Jonas for being a blackmailing white piece of sorry. But Jonas brushes off Vendetta's threat and goes back to watch the Burt Reynolds movie Sharky's Machine.
They were just street cops until they teamed up with Sharky and became Sharky's Machine.
Sharky's Machine.
It's uncertain who of the two opened the cargo bay doors of Gargantua 1, but the act kills most of the crew, including Jonas, as they're sucked out into outer space. The only people to survive were Vendetta, Red Death, Hatebit, and a young Bud Manstrong, who was the paperboy on the space station at the time, and is making his first timeline appearance right here.
Sharky's Machine.
Here we go. This is gonna, God. Team Venture, arriving late to movie night, retrieve Jonas's body from space, and after slipping on one of Rusty's plastic cowboys, place Jonas's head into the Progressive Biological Life Extension module, also known as the Problem, which we first see in Season 1. Rusty finds out about his father's death from Brock,
Your dad died.
who was kicked out of State College for beating the hell out of Rusty and company in a drunken rage after accidentally killing his football teammate Tommy. There's a bit of an anachronism that we see around this section. We know that Brock and his unnamed partner were at the 1986 Goodwill Games in Moscow, where he kills KGB assassin, the Siberian Husky, who is the father of Molotov cocktease. I don't know if we have to bleep that or not. This may or may not be her first appearance on the timeline. It's in contention with the episode Assassin Nanny 911, where we see flashbacks of Brock and Molotov in France exactly 19 years, 364 days, 23 hours, and 45 minutes ago, sometime from the year 2003 to 2004, which would put them in 1984 or 1985. There's also no hints to when Brock plucked out Molotov's eye, and not even Jackson Public has an answer for that. It gets a little confusing since we know Brock didn't leave college to join the military until 1987, when the Movie Night Massacre caused Doc Venture to drop out of college and take over Venture Industries.
I'm out of here. Gonna join the army.
But everyone at the OSI, much like the Guild, are emotionally stunted violent weirdos who love to dress up in costumes, so they probably don't keep the best records. That's the defense I'm going with for this. During this time, a recently mutated Chester Ong and his brother Doug play around with shark DNA too much and suffer the consequences. Rusty drops out of college, moves back to the Venture compound, and takes over Venture Industries, and slowly starts driving it into the ground. This doesn't stop Malcolm though, who follows Doc to the Venture compound and takes flight for the first time as the Monarch, only to get his ass beat by Doc's bodyguard, Myra Brandish, who's also making her first appearance on the timeline. After the unsanctioned attack on Gargantua 1, the Sovereign, now the head of the Guild, disguises himself as Sphinx Commander, and takes credit for the deadly raid on the space station. Brock joins the military right after getting the boot from college.
I'm out of here. Gonna join the army.
And is quickly recruited by the Office of Secret Intelligence, aka the OSI. Here's where Colonel Hunter Gathers enters our timeline for the first time as well.
Welcome to the Office of Secret Intelligence, Samson!
Brock mentions he was drafted to fight in the Pyramid Wars, a conflict between the OSI and Sphinx, as a result of the Movie Night Massacre.
That set off the Pyramid Wars. I got recruited to fight in those.
Yes, and you did one heck of a job.
The Pyramid Wars lasted for about a year, but it introduces us to not only the remaining Sphinx members, but OSI agents Shoreleave and Race Bannon, which connects the Johnny Quest universe to the Venture universe. Sorry, Action Johnny.
Are you cops?
Sometime during the end of the Pyramid Wars, as the Guild moved back into the spotlight, a young Billy Whalen makes his first appearance on the timeline and his final appearance on the trivia show Quiz Boys after he's unknowingly given the answers. And newly fired Pete White, who was working as the show's host, takes Billy on the road to meet his hero, Rusty Venture, in the hopes of getting them both jobs. There's a whole conflux of timelines happening at this point of the universe, and the years and order of which they happen is kind of a mess. Billy and Pete get turned away by Doc, who's in the middle of having Myra taken away by OSI agents, while Helper protects newborns Hank and Dean, who are making their first appearance here. Billy is then forcefully recruited by Brock and Hunter to investigate Hamilton Phantomos, and they give Billy a bionic eye and his robotic hand that is said to be a Mike Soriyama design, which hints that Mike might have worked for OSI for like just a minute.
Based on a Mike Soriyama design, is it not?
Hamilton is a professor at State University who used to work with Professor Impossible and is very likely having a irresponsible relationship with his student Sheila, which marks Dr. Mrs. the Monarch's first appearance on the timeline.
Well, thank you anyway, Professor Phantomos.
We also know this is at least 1988 or early 1989 because the Build-A-Bear group has not yet caused the fall of the Berlin Wall, which happened on November 9th of 1989.
That's what they said about the Build-A-Bear group, son. And then whammo! Berlin Wall comes tumbling down.
No, it hasn't.
Oh, it will, kiddo. It was decided at the last meeting.
The same year that Dr. Mrs. the Monarch started smoking.
When did you start smoking?
1989-ish?
Billy accidentally sabotages Professor Phantomos and his experiment, which rips out Billy's eye and gives Phantom Limb his powers and his namesake. Brock smuggles a very likely memory-wiped Billy out of OSI HQ, and he's given the worst job an OSI agent can have, bodyguard for Rusty Venture.
Ah, come on, this is rookie stuff.
Dismissed, Samson!
He's also given explicit detail to protect a specific plot of land on the grounds, which we don't see in any episode. It's also revealed that OSI agent Courtney Robert Hain is a Guild spy. Thanks to the Guild and their flashback technology, we learned that Malcolm was moonlighting as the Monarch while henching for other Guild members.
See an enemy?
Helicoptero, even Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Nightmare coat.
Sometime during all of that, Sheila, going by Lady O'Para at this time, abandons her murderous moppets and is recruited as number 2 by Phantom Limb, who the Monarch is henching for, along with Henchman 24, making his first appearance right here.
You're my boy, 24.
The Monarch eventually woos Sheila away from Phantom Limb, passes a murderous buck to Manotaur, and the two start their new lives as arches against Dr. Venture, who has just introduced Brock to the cloning lab on the Venture compound, and flushes the Dean clone, specimen D19, down the tubes. And that ends the college year section of the timeline as we casually drift into something I call the Age of Obscurity Redux. There's a handful of events that happen between the end of the 1980s and the Venture Prime era, but there's not a lot of years to go by. During this time, we know that Doc had disgustingly fathered a child with the underage president of his fan club. Pete White enjoyed a spring break in Cancun. The Monarch henchmen get their night vision goggles.
Oh, when did we get these?
Like 1994?
Why don't I know this stuff?
The Hale brothers very likely murdered their dad, and the Guild held the Guild Sentience Conference in 1998, which established guidelines in regard to torturing robots.
Monarch, this goes against the Guild Sentience Conference of 1998.
Also, 8th grader Gary Fisher is kidnapped by the Monarch's henchmen, who mistake him for a US senator. He's recruited as a henchman, and at the age of 16, witnesses Professor Vibrations die from happiness. The sea captain and the pirates probably got lost at sea sometime in the 90s, just going based off the fact that the sea captain is a Jesus Jones fan.
Jesus Jones! Ah, now there was a band.
And we close the book on the Age of Obscurity Part 2 with the Impossible family gaining their cursed space powers from space rays.
I remember when that happened! But go on, I'm sorry. You were saying?
The Slim Jim fizz.
It tastes good, but I'm just getting a whole big whiff of Slim Jim. We're entering the modern era of the show, which I'm calling Venture Prime. This is the timeline of events in the Venture universe, picking up with the boys in the pilot episode, The Terrible Secret of Turtle Bay. The pilot acts as the first episode in this era because in Season 6, I forgot the episode number. Season 6, Episode 7, A Party for Tarzan, we see the Monarch in his Mark III costume, which is seen in the pilot. We'd be here all day if I went through every single event that happened in the Venture universe. A lot of years and dates during this time are hard to nail down because, like we stated earlier, we're only seeing random days of the lives of these characters. There's so much happening off-screen that can never be confirmed, like when the previous 14 versions of the boys died and how they died.
We had a gas leak that time. The silent killer.
We're going to start with the boys in Mexico who get kidnapped by the Monarch after Speedy is choked to death by Brock. Meanwhile, Doc wakes up in a bathtub missing a kidney, which leaves him with none thanks to that accident he had as a child. The family makes a trip to Gargantua 1 where they encounter the Problem Light and an adult Bud Manstrong who mentions the movie night massacre to the Ventures.
Sharky's machine.
During a visit to Brisbyland, Roy Brisby mentions cloning for the first time in the show's history.
And I vaguely remember him mentioning he was dabbling in clone research.
Something he probably learned while working with Jonas. Molotov retrieves Lily the Panda for David Bowie.
Mr. Bowie.
Orpheus and Triana move into the old Arachnid lab and pop up on the timeline for the first time. Doc takes the family out to the Bermuda Triangle to try and retrieve the TVC-15, which Major Tom crashed in 1969. This is also when the fake ghost pirates are rescued from being stranded out at sea.
Can we have a ride home?
What? Doc is selected for Professor Impossible's think tank. At the same time, Race Bannon dies while trying to retrieve the Goliath serum, which ends up hitting Hank in the face. Doc exits the think tank after conceiving another son that he won't take care of, and then jets to Mike Sorayama's fake funeral, which turns out to be a real funeral, and the boys meet the original Team Venture for the first time, and we reach another timeline event that's very hard to quantify. In the episode Past Tense in Season 1, Dr. Orpheus grabs the hands of the Action Man and says,
2 years, 17 days. From a stroke.
We'll touch on that a lot later. After a huge fight, the Monarch and Dr. Girlfriend split up, causing the Monarch to spiral into a pretty hefty bender, which leads to the Monarch killing Captain Sunshine's ward, Wonder Boy.
You sent the charred remains of Wonder Boy to his beloved Captain Sunshine.
Yes.
Remember when we were broken up and I was drinking a lot? Well, I kind of slew him.
After a trial is rigged by Phantom Limb, the Monarch goes to jail, where he links up with some C-list villains and King Gorilla, who is serving time after killing Motley Crue frontman Vince Neil on the VH1 show The Surreal Life.
They wanted the surreal life. KG gave it to him.
After a midnight screening of Rocky Horror Picture Show, Doc is sent to the hospital to have a painful tumor removed, which turns out to be his identical twin who he ate in the womb.
That's impossible. I don't have
You
it.
sucker punched me in the womb. I've been inside you all your life, watching, listening, planning.
After all things are copacetic between Doc and JJ, 21 and 24 accidentally kill the boys, who are the 14th clones of the original Hank and Dean.
All right, get their clothes.
Doc goes on his dead son sabbatical until he's dragged back to the compound by Brock.
This is Sky! We're gonna have a child! Please!
Where JJ has become half owner of Venture Industries and moves to Spider Skull Island. Orpheus attempts to resurrect the boys and then gets the hammer dropped on him that the death-prone boy adventurers have died more than a baker's dozen amount of times.
Look, if you have a clumsy child, you make him wear a helmet. If you have death-prone children, you keep a few clones of them in your lab.
Before and during this time, the Monarch's henchmen do a poor job of stealing hover technology from Sergeant Hatred.
Where'd you get those?
Spoils of war, my friend. Yeah, Sergeant Hatred's, I think.
And the Monarch soon breaks out of jail with the help of King Gorilla. We reach one of two events on the timeline that happens in its own pocket timeline. And that's the episode Escape to the House of Mummies.
Escape to the House of Mummies.
The reason why the events of this episode happen in their own timeline is because time travel is involved. All of the time travel and historical figures that get wrapped up in this adventure make it too unwieldy to live in the main timeline.
You think we messed up the past?
I wouldn't worry about that.
The Monarch mails a Cobra to Doc Venture on June 6, 2003, and we're now on to a very important episode. In the episode 20 Years to Midnight, Brock finds an old tape that is left for Doc Venture. On this tape, possibly Jonas tells Rusty that he must assemble pieces of a super high-tech device on May 4th of 2004 of Doc's 44th year.
On May 4th of your 44th year,
Doc, that's
should I
like
fail to
tomorrow.
live to see that day?
The timeline doesn't hold super tight to this, but this episode gives us a confirmed point in time. The episode introduces Action Johnny, Rocket Impossible, JJ and Sally getting together, and the fact that aliens exist in the Venture universe.
We know what we're doing up there, okay? So don't second guess me.
Triana's friend Kim makes her one and only appearance on a double date with the boys, and it's revealed that Billy doesn't remember how he got his robotic hand.
How'd you get that thing? That's an excellent question. I have no idea.
So it's very likely he got his memory wiped by the OSI, or he hit his head a lot while being in the trunk of Brock's car. Also, the Order of the Triad is reformed by Dr. Orpheus. He recruits his old occult buddies, Blackula Hunter, Jefferson Twilight, and the Alchemist. They don't play a huge role in the timeline, but I really love them, so they get a mention.
Hey, look! I'm in the residence!
Gargantua 1 mysteriously crashes into Earth and crushes a bunker filled with terrorists, making Bud Manstrong an American hero, until the boys and the ghost of Abraham Lincoln stop Bud Manstrong from assassinating the president in a Manchurian candidate situation.
Didn't either of you see the Manchurian candidate?
The boys are kidnapped by Myra, who reveals to them that she is their biological mother, but aside from Doc saying they boned once, there's no proof outside of her claims.
All right, so I f***ed her. What of it?
Dr. Killinger is introduced for the first time and helps the Monarch reunite with Dr. Girlfriend and repair their relationship.
Sweet love.
Now with United Cocoon, the Monarch attacks the Venture compound, where a nameless Monarch henchman is killed by Brock Sampson, and then brought back to life by Doc and is dubbed Venturestein. That's f***ed up. We also meet the Groovy Gang in this episode, which is the only episode not written by Jackson Public or Doc Hammer. It was written by the creator of The Tick, Ben Edlund. The Groovy Gang characters are based on real-life true crime figures. Serial killers Ted Bundy and David Berkowitz, famous kidnapped granddaughter turned bank robber Patty Hearst, and Valerie Solanas, who shot Andy Warhol in 1968 for not producing her plays.
Patriarchal white pig square's nest.
Fire out, Val.
Phantom Limb wipes out the Monarch's prison pals and Tiny Attorney in the lead up to his wedding to Dr. Girlfriend, and we see the Sovereign for the first time making his debut at the end of season 2, flanked by musicians Iggy Pop and Klaus Nomi, which points towards the Guild's roots as a weird rock and roll orchestra.
Ding dong, the queen bitch is dead.
The Sovereign helps defeat Phantom Limb, who is gravely injured during the showdown at Cremation Creek.
The guy from Labyrinth turned into a bird!
And the Monarch and Dr. Girlfriend are re-inducted into the Guild following their marriage. They move into Phantom Limb's home in the gated community of Malice, which is home to a lot of arches, including Sergeant Hatred. Sergeant Hatred is assigned to arch Doc Venture and handles them with kid gloves. Doc also opens the Rusty Day Camp for boy adventurers as a blatant cash grab. This is also the first appearance of Dermot Fichtel, Doc's illegitimate son, who he fathered with the president of his fan club. And Doc and Billy open the Eden for the first time in 40 years and lose a camper in the process. Doc later reunites with Dr. Tara Quim, Colonel Gentleman's stepdaughter, and meets her two daughters, Nancy and Drew. Back at the compound, while taking the old Venture drill tank out for a spin, Doc accidentally falls into the old Fallout shelter and is captured by the orphans who his father abandoned back in 1978.
Is that the guy from the Buggles?
Brock discovers Professor Entman, who is left behind by Jonas. The Vonarch. Who the fuck is the Vonarch? The Monarch vaporizes Dr. Dugong in an effort to get reassigned as Doc Venture's arch and f***s a robot in between all that.
What are you doing to her? I'm giving your robot chlamydia.
We also get another firm date in this episode in the Venture Home News, which has a publishing date of May 23rd, 2008. So we're officially more than 4 years out from the events of May 4th, 2004. Henchman 21 reveals to Hank that he's seen him die, specifically referencing a shotgun blast to the face, making Hank think he's immortal.
I have personally seen you die twice. Seriously, like shotgun to the face.
The Monarch is assigned to JJ, who has just recently opened the Jonas Venture Jr. Museum of Jonas Venture on Spider Skull Island, which almost explodes but is saved thanks to Professor Impossible.
Tell the truth. You was just trying to kill yourself, weren't you?
Mr. Doe and Mr. Cardholder from the OSI make their existence known to JJ. These characters are inspired by the works of authors Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. 21 and 24 and the newly recruited Henchman 1 successfully pull a switcheroo and start arching Doc again. Oh, and Henchman 1 gets pummeled to death by Brock, or so we think. Spoiler. Billy decodes hidden messages he has discovered in episodes of the Rusty Venture cartoon, which leads to Doc and Billy to dig in the spot of the Venture compound that Brock was given orders to protect when he got the bodyguard gig.
I was given explicit instructions to watch that exact patch of grounds.
See, he did say that. They uncover a wax cylinder from the first Venture bodyguard, Sandow, which leads Brock to Kano, who breaks his vow of silence that he took after ripping off Don Fitzcarraldo's head. And Doc and Billy track down the orb, which wasn't hidden in the bathroom at Studio 54. Brock learns that he's been marked by the OSI, who send their deadliest assassins after him and the family. Brock lures the OSI into a face-off against the Monarch and his henchmen, which ends with the boys releasing the entire collection of clone slugs onto the battlefield because they are dumb. They are dumb children. A bloodbath follows, which includes a booby-trapped helper killing Henchman 24 and seriously injuring Brock, who wakes up aboard the OSI helicarrier with Helper's head lodged in his chest. Oh, and the whole OSI marking Brock for death was a ploy by Molotov and her Blackhearts to clear the deadliest assassins in the world off the board. A couple months later, Brock tracks down Dr. Volcano, who had recently handed over a dog with the soul of Hitler in it to a trio of dumb Nazis. Shortly after, Doc is approached by 21, who gives over his prized possession to Doc in exchange for cloning Henchman 24 in an attempt to bring him back to life. The prized possession being a mint condition Marvel Comics #1. Also, those fake Germans demand Doc to clone Hitler from the dog's DNA. Sergeant Hadron is assigned as the new Venture bodyguard, Helper is rebuilt and joined with a walking eye, and those Nazis from the last paragraph take Doc hostage, which ends with them getting Spielberged by Dr. Orpheus, who also destroys the cloning lab. Brock attempts to infiltrate the Blackhearts and learns that Sphinx is under new management and has been working in the shadows for years. And he kills Hitler.
Brock? Hey, Hank. Killed Hitler.
Hank becomes a sidekick to Captain Sunshine, technically Captain Sunshine #2 for like a minute. Dean learns about Prog Rock and encounters the now grown specimen D19, who eventually gets blown up thanks to a hug. Phantom Limb returns to the timeline to kidnap the Council of 13 members Red Mantle and Dragoon in an attempt to find the orb. The Sovereign, with Brian Eno in attendance, reveals that Dean is actually the proper heir to ruling the Guild of Calamitous Intent thanks to Colonel Venture. Dean knights the Sovereign as the proper head of the Guild, and Phantom Limb is thrown into Guild prison. Monstroso gets one over on the Monarch and takes over arching Doc until Sphinx and 21 get involved, and Sphinx is revealed to be working out of an abandoned building on the Venture compound, which leads Billy and the boys to getting a memory wipe. Brock and the boys locate the Sevens inside of Doc while they're on a less than fantastic voyage.
So that's what happened to the Sevens.
What?
Dean gets rejected from State University, and a very broken Professor Impossible helps Phantom Limb regrow his limbs through science. The investors, Lips, Skira, and Cassius, make their first appearance both in the show and in the timeline here as well. These characters are named after lesser wind deities in Greek mythology. A villain named Zero abducts a whole mess of protagonists and their sidekicks, except for Doc. During all of this, we get our first mention of the Peril Partnership, who will come back into play later down the road.
So what? The Peril Partnership's in, like, Canada.
Hank spends a summer at home where he accidentally learns who Dermot's father is, while Dean is away in New York interning for a nearly bankrupt Professor Impossible. Doc invades Dean's apartment to write his musical, we're introduced to the Brown Widow, and Phantom Limb convinces Professor Impossible to form a version of the Revenge Society that isn't made up of a coffee mug and a black Ferragamo shoe.
Sweetie, have you seen my other shoe? It's black Ferragamo.
Doc is transported to another universe and then promptly returned to his after he tries to kill a more successful version of Doc and take his place. The investors remove King Gorilla's heart and kidnap Billy to perform a transplant on Monstroso, who is later taken into Sphinx custody. Sphinx attempts to hand over Monstroso to the OSI in exchange for being given a clean slate. Gathers mentions that there is a guild mole inside the OSI, who turn out to be Doe and Cardholder. General Tracer gives control of the OSI over to Hunter before launching himself into space in the hopes that aliens will help fix his PP cancer.
The Star People fixed my PP cancer!
All this time, Monstroso's body is back at the compound, which is in the middle of homeschool prom for the boys. The prom is infiltrated by Molotov's Blackhearts, while Molotov smuggles her lover Monstroso's body, which she eventually drops off a cliff with her and Monstroso inside. The Blackhearts can't kill the prom attendees because they're transformed into fly monsters thanks to Doc's Spanish fly. Molotov and Monstroso's bodies are not found in the crash, and Doc begins his highly unethical construction of the Palamon Project, which hits a few hiccups but is eventually installed on Gargantua 2. Sometime between the end of prom and during Halloween, Dean discovers Ben, his grandfather's old lab partner who tells Dean about the clones.
Oh, you're Dean. There's no other Dean. You're it. Flesh and blood. Look, I was conceived in the backseat of a Packard. You were conceived in a tank. So what?
Venturstein, from Season 2, along with 2 corpses from the Groovy Gang, start a revolution on behalf of mutant experiments and forms the island of Abomination. That probably will get cut out. The Sphinx team hands over the keys to Gary and rejoins the OSI. Gary's time as Sphinx leader is short-lived after Brock and Shirley liquidate what's left of the original Sphinx members and Sphinx technology.
Hank, can you close your eyes?
Of course.
Then do it.
OSI captures Monstroso and Molotov, who is then dropped off the helicarrier by the investors after he starts IDing members of the Council of 13. Molotov is then recruited by the OSI after they fake her own death. The boys learn that Myra is not their biological mother, and the OSI raids Don Hell's nightclub, which is a reference to late New York nightclub owner Don Hill. Then Data then gets his literal hinges beaten off of him by Brock, leaving him confused and alone as he begins walking back to the Morpho Cave. Monarch scoops up Doc's body after a giant disco ball is dropped on him. Dr. Ant-Man is crushed by the Action Man. Doc then escapes the Monarch just before an overzealous Sergeant Hatred blows up the cocoon, which causes the Monarch crew to move to Malcolm's family home in Newark, New Jersey, which is currently being squatted in by the Revenge Society. Oh, and Dean reveals to Hank that they're clones, which finally closes the loop on the whole clone saga. Not that one. Gargantua 2 has its grand opening, and a whole slew of loose ends get strung together. The Sovereign starts clearing out the Council of 13 as the OSI begins closing in on them. The Sovereign, the Revenge Society, the Investors, and the Monarch all target the orbiting casino for their own reasons. The Sovereign is looking to kill the investors before they can collect a contract that the Sovereign signed a while back.
So you signed the deal with the devil, and now you want to welch on it.
Right. The head of a global evil organization is a bad man. Who'd have guessed? Total shocker.
JJ reveals to Doc that he's dying and has some kind of plan lined up with the investors, which never comes to fruition because Killinger kills his magical brothers. With the Sovereign on the lam, the depleted Council of 13 is replaced with Phantom Limb, Dr. Z, Radical Left, Dr. Mrs. the Monarch, and Drag Mantle / Red Goon. Whichever one of those has a better mouthfeel to you. The deceased JJ then leaves Ventec Tower and his incredibly profitable empire to Doc, and the family moves to New York where Doc does what he does best: ruin things. This felt like a good time to take a breather. We're still technically in the Venture Prime era, but the move to New York introduces a whole new world of villains, organizations, and relationships. So just gonna take a moment and enjoy this Slim Jim fizz before we start talking by the mistake by the Malake, New York, New York. Doc, Hatred, and the boys move into Ventec Tower and are almost immediately shaken down by the Crusaders Action League, which is made up of Stars and Garters, Oriana, Night Dick, and Fallen Archer, or as Hank calls them,
What? Pretty much the Avengers are on our porch.
Dean takes a tour of Stuyvesant University, which is named after Peter Stuyvesant. Included that for all the pre-revolutionary warheads out there. All 12 of you. I see you. Dean meets Jared, aka the Brown Widow, while touring the campus. Brock is reassigned as Doc's bodyguard by the OSI, and the guild starts taking resumes to fill out the new Council of 13. With his newly inherited status, Doc is the #1 arch target in New York, which means there's a long line of arches in front of him. DMTM approaches Widewell, the kingpin of New York's villains, to join the guild by giving him arching rights to Dr. Venture. Hatred becomes a tour guide at Ventec Tower, Manolo reveals the Morpho Cave to the Monarch, and Augustus St. Cloud buys and sells Billy and White to Venture Industries.
Pack your bags, White. We're going to New York City.
Copycat sows distress between Monarch and his wife. Hank begins courting Serena, the daughter of Widewale, and 21 convinces the Monarch to take up the mantle of the Blue Morpho in order to take out the arches in front of him in line to terrorize Venture. And he sees the blackmail tape of his dad and Jonas having a tiny orgy.
I am like 80% positive that is Jill St. John and Stella Stevens.
21 and the Monarch go on an accidental maiming spree, which wipes out Harangatang, Think Tank, and West Warhammer and the Doom Factory, which is a parody of the Legion of Doom and Andy Warhol superstars who regularly worked out of Warhol's studio, which was named The Factory, a group of truly astounding, obnoxious people. Dr. Mrs. the Monarch begins to suspect that Dr. Venture is the Blue Morpho, thanks to a chopped goatee, bad timing, and that Doc and the Monarch are almost built exactly the same.
You're, what, size Doc?
Thanks to coincidence and a half-decent plan, the guild almost kills Doc. 21 kills the Wandering Spider at the Monarch's request. That's up, and this gets the guild to stop targeting Doc. The Monarch takes the safe route and negotiates with Red Death to move up Venture's arch list, leaving Widewell the only villain left in the Monarch's way. Widewell's revenge on the Monarch gets sorted out when it turns out that his brother, Dr. Dugong, has been alive for years and in OSI protection.
Serena? It's me, your Uncle Douglas.
Oh my god, hi. I have an uncle?
At the same time, Venturion, aka Vendetta, aka the Blue Morpho, aka Fitzcarraldo, arrives in New York City to confront the digital consciousness of Jonas Venture. Now this is when a big question mark in the timeline sticks its big stupid f***ing head in the picture. The Action Man begins to suffer from a stroke, which Orpheus identifies immediately, probably because he's the one who cursed him with it.
Oh my god, is he having a heart attack?
A stroke.
Oh my god!
So has majority of the Venture Prime timeline taken place in 2 years and about a month and a half. The Venture Brothers book ends with the season 6 finale, but the commentary for the episode Arrears in Science has the answer.
The stroke
now,
predicted
as far as canon, yeah, I don't know if this is necessarily exactly the amount of time that Orpheus predicted. It could be. I was working it out when I was writing it. I was like, that's not bad. The out is like, if somebody told you you're going to have a stroke in 2 years, you might start taking a little bit of aspirin or
blood thinner,
eating a little differently. So he might have staved it off.
So there's your answer. We know that this is at least 4 years after the events of 20 Years to Midnight. Taking a multivitamin can really do a lot. Jonas attempts to take control of Don's body, which ends with both of them finally kicking the bucket and closing the book on Jonas Venture. Rest in peace. The second Treaty of Tolerance Summit is held at the burned out Venture compound, and the guild is made aware of the relationship between OSI agent Kimberly McManus and guild stranger S-464, who is a mole for the Peril Partnership. We're almost there, I swear, we're almost done. I swear we're almost done. Doc finally does something well and invents functioning teleporter technology, which he plans to sell. The OSI straps him into the Fidelio machine to stop him from destabilizing the world market with his invention. The Monarch joins a guild-sanctioned heist, which turns out to be a double cross by Copycat, and gets pretty much everyone killed except for the Monarch N21. Doc is sent on a mission to dismantle a weather machine that's hovering above New York, which the guild thinks was taken by the Creep, who is the head of the Peril Partnership. It turns out the Creep was a former OSI agent who became a supervillain after he mistook a troop of Boy Scouts for enemy militia. He's also a huge hoarder of super science tech, including the Monarch's butter glider, Tank Top's armor, and Grover Cleveland's presidential time machine, which we first saw in episode 9 of season 1. And this is where our second floating point in the timeline lands. Doc and Billy exit the presidential time machine looking for one of Doc's fingers. He then refers to the Monarch as Malcolm and asks what he's doing 70 million years ago, right before the Creep catches a lawn dart in the head.
You win.
During all this, Hank ventures out into a blizzard to check on Serena and accidentally dives headfirst into a fire hydrant. He's rescued by Scare Bear, who carries Hank to a bodega and then to Dean's dorm room for reasons we still don't know. And I know there's a ton of theories on who Scare Bear is. It might be Hank, it might be time traveling people. I don't care. I've read them all. We don't have time for it. Hank eventually blacks out and wakes up in Coma Town, where he learns that Action Man is a huge Barbarella fan, and that the boy's mom was an actress named Bobby St. Simone, who changed her name and moved away when Doc started becoming too obsessive. Doc is then kidnapped by the guild in preparation for the Saphrax Protocol, which is named after Altheus and Saphrax, who were two Gothic chieftains who won the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD against the Roman Empire. The Monarch passes the final test of initiation by sparing Doc, and is then told by Watch and Ward that he and Doc Venture are related after they run multiple DNA tests.
The Monarch and Dr. Venture are blood related.
Back on Earth, Hank awakes from his coma and sneaks out of the hospital. The last we see of Hank, or any of the Venture universe, is Hank leaving to find himself while wearing his plastic Batman mask. And that's it. That's the whole Venture timeline. Holy shit, we did it.
That's a history you can trust.
With Venture Brothers possibly coming to an end with this film, this is my little thank you and a send-off to a show that has meant so much to me and the small but mighty army of Venture fans out there. You're who I made this video for, and I really hope you liked it. But tell me, what do you think? Is there anything I missed or should have included in the timeline?
Please do not look away from the nozzle.
Who has your favorite arc throughout the series, and why is it 21? And how excited are you for raiding Is the Blood of the Baboon Heart? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and for the best and truly horrific cocktail recipes,
Less ice this time!
stay tuned to Nerdist.com.